No one really likes a prophet. You all know what this stuff is? What is this? The band was here at first service. They know the answer. It's hand sanitizer. Why do we use it? What's it for? Kills germs. Okay. Everyone in our society knows this. Everyone from the oldest to the youngest to the biggest to the smallest, we all know that there are living things out there too small for us to see. Things that, well, can make us sick. But 150 years ago or so, such a thought was considered preposterous by the very best scientists. I remember the first time I saw maggots. I thought they were rice, except they moved. We called them moving rice. And I remember my dad telling me that these were actually baby flies. I just thought they were gross. But common knowledge 150 years ago was that maggots and other agents of decay were actually the product of something called spontaneous generation. It was the belief that lower forms of life could emerge from lifeless matter. This idea came about from the observation, obviously incomplete, that things like flies and worms show up in rotten meat, or that frogs just spring out of mud, or mice are found in rotten wheat. The idea seems childish to us, but the idea of spontaneous generation was first espoused by Aristotle. It was backed up by middle-aged theologians like Aquinas, and it even had a proponent in the likes of Sir Isaac Newton. So in other words, this was a theory held by some of the greatest minds of all time. Into this realm came Louis Pasteur. And Louis Pasteur started doing experiments on, of all things, decay. And he found that if you took a substance and you sterilized it, like you boiled broth to kill anything living inside of it, and then you shut it away from the elements, it didn't go bad. And he began a series of experiments that eventually showed that there is a host of living organisms around us. Organisms that can make us sick, but also help us to do things like make bread or wine. Organisms too small to see, but real enough to sometimes kill us. The science of microbiology was born. But the words of Louis Pasteur? In a world where doctors wiped their scalpels off on their pants before surgery, never washed their hands or wore masks, they were dismissed, scorned, fantasy. How can you try to debunk the wisdom of the ages? How can you believe in something so small it can't even be seen? So Pasteur became a scientific outcast. They laughed at him. And so he labored alone with a few faithful followers, studying germs and trying to figure out how he might be able to save lives. This continued for several years. He developed the process we now know as pasteurization. He developed the first vaccine, an inoculation given to barn fowl, birds, to keep them from getting cholera. But then a remarkable opportunity presented itself in a horrible situation. A desperate woman brought her son to Pasteur. The boy had been mauled by a rabid dog. The boy was going to die. But Pasteur had been working on an inoculation for rabies. He gave the inoculation to the boy, and the boy lived. And suddenly, the scientist that everyone laughed at because he saw the world differently was a hero. Have you ever wondered why John was in the wilderness? It's not easy to be a prophet. Religion was the lifeblood of the Jewish people. It was the center of everything. Their educational system, their social structure, their political system, even their commerce. Everything dripped with the rich tradition of their life with God. And the temple, the biggest structure in the world dedicated to the worship of God, a sprawling complex that covered 35 acres. At this temple, you could take ritual baths to be cleansed of your sin. You could hear the rabbis teaching. You could buy animals to be sacrificed so that you would be right with God. It was a well-oiled machine that kept people holy, and the priests, well, let's just say life was good. It was an institution supported by the culture, by the monarchy, and by most of the religious leadership. And it was not an institution you spoke out against. Because if you did speak out against it, you probably weren't going to last too long. John went into the region all around the Jordan, preaching a baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sin. He was doing in the river what you usually went to the temple to do. And as he did this, he preached, "Every valley shall be filled, every mountain and hill shall be made low, the crooked shall be made straight, and the rough ways made smooth, and all flesh shall see the salvation of God." Beautiful words. Words of Isaiah, words from the holy books of Judah. But in this age, fighting words. Because now the system of Israel supported the high and the low, the rich and the poor. And you could not have one without the other. And there was that subtle insinuation that those who had were loved by God a little bit more than those who had not. But John felt the words of the prophets burning in his own prophetic heart. Words that years and years before had decried the situation of the poor, had decried the setting up of a system where people who were family could be set so far apart. And John heard these words anew in his heart, and he knew that light was coming. But the only safe place to proclaim such a thing for any length of time was the wilderness. It's not easy to be a prophet. For you see, prophets, they tell people that the way they see things is wrong, that they are mistaken, that they need to turn. And people, especially those who think they know, don't always appreciate it. We certainly have our issues today with highs and lows. We hear a lot of conversation right now about taxation and entitlements and economics and so on and so forth. And when you listen to people talk, you realize that most folks are just trying to hang on to what they have. And that, in and of itself, is not a bad thing. But there's precious little concern being voiced for the good of all. You don't hear a lot of talk about the fact that we really are all in this together, that we really are called to help and support each other, that we're even called to try and offer salvation as John preached. For salvation is not just a next lifetime thing, it's a here and now thing. And it's vitally important when salvation means jobs and shelter and bread for those in need. The religious authorities did not like what they were hearing from John. They did not like this guy offering free religious baths in the river. They did not like that people were going to see him in droves when they should have been spending their money in the temple. They did not like him offering hope to the poor. John did not see the world the way they did. But at least for a while, in the reality of the wilderness, there wasn't much they could do about the crazy guy. Every day you and I are charged with seeing the world differently. We are charged with looking at those the world calls outcasts and calling them brother and sister. We are charged with looking at what we have and seeing how we might share it with others. We are charged with loving our neighbor. We're even charged with loving our enemies. And this is not the way the world sees. It never has been. It's not easy to be a prophet. But in a sense, that's what we're all called to be. We don't wear camel skins, but they should clothe our hearts. We don't eat locusts, at least most of us. But we have been called to be nourished by the Word and even the food of God. We don't proclaim the message from the wilderness, but we are still called to proclaim. In this season, seek the light. Seek to be the voice of God. Call others through your love and through your example to see the world a little more like God sees the world. It might not be easy to be a prophet, but our world won't survive unless we take up the prophet's call.